all of my performances embodying different universes. And so I think
I
that
like
what
that.
even if it's not physically manifesting the same way across each thing, um I think my brand is maybe a little bit more of a spiritual brand or a psychic brand that exists
Yes.
there.
I no, I completely agree. Like there is the Florida themselves is like a is an ephemeral like spirit almost that is channeled through each one of these different like first of all immaculate outfits like
Thank you.
and
I can't
amazing
take
and
credit for
amazing
those.
wigs. I don't know who does those.
Oh, get your wigs from Shik's a Mess.
Get my plug in. But yeah, it's I have always been stunned like by the versatility and yeah, and the depth of each character. It feels as though like Lady Voldemort and your pig character from Winter Takes It All like could each inhabit their own drag world. They could like run off and brand themselves independently because they are so beautifully done.
Well,
So
thank you.
from there, what like coming up in the San Francisco drag scene were like what about it to you was unique and positive, and then what were the struggles that you had growing in your fame? Because it's like you've obviously gotten to this point where you were touring the country with a series
Hmm.
of like beloved performances, and so like what brought you to the place that you are at now, producing Turbo Pageant and being a like country trotting drag queen? Sorry, horribly phrased question. I'm so sorry.
No, but I actually think that's a great question because, I mean, if I'm going to parse it apart into parts, and the first part
Yes.
of the question was like, what was unique about the experience coming up in San Francisco? I mean, in addition to what I've already talked about with the rich history of San Francisco, with which I think like that irreverence really informed a lot of my drag. Um, y- Lady Voldemort, you cannot deny like that experience of going viral. I was
Transformational.
Yeah, I was only a year into drag at that point. I think that was maybe month 13 or something like
That's
that.
incredible. First of all, to be able to apply that sort of prosthetic at that, like you advance through some skills pretty quickly.
Well, it's actually kind of funny if you watch the video back. It's actually really poorly done in the video that went viral. I have upped my level since then, and
Okay.
people, I think, see Voldemort now and think that's what Voldemort looked like then.
Okay, I'll go look back.
That original video was a little rough.
Okay.
Um, but that, I mean, by the end of that was October 5th, 2018, and uh by the end of that month, October 31st, I was literally touring internationally. I was being lifted up into the sky on a show where I was like featured alongside Jinx Monsoon, Alaska, Sharon
Simply
Needles,
because of
Latrice.
the perfect like prism you put on that number of like sexy, burlesque, big tits, Voldemort. Like, is that really it? Like, people just resonated with it so deeply.
I don't know because I've seen like I mean like if we're gonna talk about going viral, Miss Toto's the queen of going viral. You've
Yeah.
got like Nikki's gone viral, like queens have gone viral, but there was something about that particular performance that just like I don't know what sort of
It ignited something in people. It
it
really
it, it,
did.
it really did. I don't know how much credit I get to take for it because I was really pulling from a lot of different things, but I do
Hmm.
want to give myself some credit where it's like no, I do put a lot of work that I believe is more actually spiritual work than anything into my performances where
Right.
they're not just like I pick a number and I go out there and lip sync. Like each of my numbers is crafted, and
A
to
hundred
to
percent.
have that like recognized and like embraced like that was mind blowing, mind
No.
blowing.
Oh, completely. And I think like no, and you can fully take credit for that. And I think that that definitely like attests to your drag style, and that like sure that it's pulling from a million different references, but you I think are the only person that could have drawn that straight line and create
Sure. Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
like
totally.
and refracted all of those ideas into what ended up being this like perfect Voldemort character that people really did take it and run. Like I'm sure it must have been overwhelming for like at least at the beginning to be like, oh, this was just. I couldn't imagine like me just going on for a drag number and coming off stage, and the next day it's like, holy shit, people love this.
Well, what people don't really I mean, some people know about this, about that experience, was that literally days before that number had gone viral, I had posted on my Facebook saying that I was moving back home to Miami to try to get sober.
Right.
I was at that point had like fully relapsed back into meth. I was like psychologically going through it, and that Voldemort performance was like the first of the sort of like unofficial farewell tour I had planned in San Francisco.
Right.
So now coupled like I'm dealing with this like addiction issues that are just like flaring up. Clearly a lot of like unaddressed work from like my past is flaring up, while like suddenly I'm also achieving like the biggest break that anyone could ever dream
Right.
of in drag, you know? Like let's be real, that's what everybody wants for their performances.
Exactly. Virality is kind of one of the top things that you can go for as far as like the drag industry right now.
Hmm.
And it would be tough, I imagine, regardless of the circumstances, to want to think about denying yourself that, to not just take it and ride.
Exactly. And when I was on that tour, I realized that I got a taste of what performing at that caliber could be like, or what that
Hmm.
life is like, being on the tour bus, being all that stuff. And I also learned that I had a lot to grow. You know, like I was looking at myself a lot on that trip and realizing, uh, if I don't deal with this shit that I am like going through in my personal life, this is all going to be 15 minutes.
Right.
And so I made a point as soon as I got back from that tour, I started dealing with my insurance stuff and I checked myself into rehab and I took a 6 month break from drag.
Right.
And
And
that
in
was
that
the first.
way, sorry, and
Go.
in that way, I feel like it is. I mean, obviously, nothing bad should ever happen to you. I value you deeply as a person and an artist, and you should be protected in every way. But it's like it's serendipitous in the fact that like you got this beautiful taste
Mhm.
of a dream that you could certainly pursue,
Hmm.
and then you're like, okay, I need to protect this at all costs. Let me do what it
Well,
takes.
what that said to me was, I think I always struggled with this notion of like being worth it and self-esteem, and like is is I've always known I've had a unique perspective on the world, and is that just me like being full of myself, or is there actually something there?
Tell
And
me about it.
like
The
that
imposter
that was
syndrome of it all.
right. And that was the universe telling me, like, look, you've got something here. We're going to give you this one thing and like show you that, like, look at the impact that you can have on people, but you're going to have to deal with yourself. Like, we're not just going to like hand this to you. You're going to have to put in the work. And so I'm really grateful that I got that like brief glimpse of like what my life could be like. And
Yes.
I'm slowly working towards, um, not necessarily getting there,
Hmm.
but
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 building a
like
foundation that you could
right.
if you wanted to, that would
Yeah,
be within your realm of possibility.
exactly, to achieve my potential.
Yes.
Um, and it was in that time that when I took the break from drag, when I to focus on recovery, was the first time I had really sort of seriously explored any sense of spirituality, because that's a very important part of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yes.
You know, the everyone likes to focus on, you know, oh, you have to believe in God and this and that, and I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of it. It's just this notion of a higher power and
Right.
foregoing your will, and it really is this like incredible program that has saved so many people and like kept me sober for a solid 18 months.
Yeah.
um
And I think, yeah,
and
there are a lot of people that are turned away from it for that reason, and it
Mhm.
really is just a matter of just of seeing it as spirituality on the whole. I think on a
Mhm.
much lesser scale, I went through the artist's way this year, which I'm sure I will
Mm.
talk about ad nauseum to the point that people will stop listening to the podcast. Um, but it's like the principal conceit behind it is like, hey, you don't have to believe in like God or be involved in any sort of religion whatsoever
Sure.
to do this program, but like test out the belief that something is helping you, someone or something or
Hmm.
any sort of force at all out there is like rooting for you and supporting you, and like grab a hold of that because it is tangible in some way, and so it is
Yes.
valuable to that whole process.
Yes, absolutely. And it's definitely those moments of like, you know, whether when you're trying to make a change in your life, which tend to be not always, but in my case was a moment of desperation, you know, of like desperately trying to get sober.
Hmm.
Um, those are the moments where I think we're a little bit more malleable and open to this notion of spirituality that we maybe had like been a little bit more rigidly against. But when
100%.
we have behaviors that we're like, I'm ramming my head against the wall over and over and over again, and what I'm doing clearly isn't working. That's when I'm like, you know what? I don't know if I believe in this shit 100%, but I'm going to give it a shot. And then if I see the results, I'm not going to question it.
Exactly. If you find anything within that, like that realm of belief, like, yeah, take it and run and let it be
Hmm.
useful to you,
Hmm.
whatever form of spirituality that is.
Hmm. Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
so you went from a Catholic upbringing. Did you have any sort of
Yes.
like religious influences going into this new spirit? Are you like pursuing Buddhism? What like is does anything in particular speak to you, or is it very much personal, going by the seat of your soul?
Well, at first it was more of this like just focusing on AA, and then obviously having this Catholic upbringing like inform like it helped contextualize a lot of the things that I either agreed with or disagreed with as a kid. Um, but when I made the decision to leave AA to because so sorry, long answers for everything.
No, it's okay. I'm
Uh,
I'm also asking very serious questions. This is the earnest installation of the podcast. But I'm really enjoying it. So please elaborate. Like,
totally.
go off.
Um, I there was something about AA that really worked for me, but at the same time, I struggled with the notion of they're fun, like something that's fundamental there is this notion of the disease of addiction. And
Right.
like effectively, I mean, this is someone who's in AA is probably gonna think I'm butchering this, but you're effectively training yourself to have this endurance contest, especially with like, especially looking at like the looking at the neuroscience behind things too. It's like, well, where do you draw the line between what counts as a mind altering drug and what doesn't count as a mind altering drug? Where you can't
Mm,
even take painkillers when, when you break your leg or, um, there's just all of these technicalities in there that make sense if you like don't think too much about it. But as soon as you start to drill in a little bit deeper, you're like, wait a minute. And unfortunately, I'm the kind of person who always likes to drill a
of
little bit too
course. Yeah.
deeply in there. And
And it's perhaps a framework that will work really, really effectively for people whose lives can totally operate without having to
it
investigate. You know.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it does. And there is a lot of investigation. I don't want to place any sort of like oh, people in 12-step programs are lesser evolved. No, it's
No,
that's not
of
the
course
case.
not.
It's
Of
just
course.
coming at things from different life experiences. And
Hmm.
I found that given my life experiences, I had a really hard time with it. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try out some psychedelics and see if that does anything. And if it doesn't, if I find that I still have any issues, like I'll jump right back into AA. And what I found was that after I did acid with a bunch of my housemates, and it was my first time doing any sort of drug with this notion of intention setting, where
Right.
it's like I'm not doing these drugs with the notion of trying to escape myself. I'm using these drugs with the intention of trying to get closer to myself. Um,
Yes. And that's huge. Let's go ahead and just like make this the topic, talking about drugs, drug therapy, and the drugs in general. I think I'll just entitle the episode "Drugs with Florida Man." Um, um, because yeah, so you started with acid, and how was that initial experience? Because I think it's so important going into especially something deeply psychedelic like acid that lasts 12 hours and
mhm.
and has varying levels of immersion in it, to take care of your set and setting and to take care of your thought patterns when you go into it. How was that first time?
I got very lucky in the sense that I live in a warehouse space with a dozen plus people. I think there were maybe 16 of us living there at the time.
Which I will
We've
love to
lost
pick your brain about more, because I think communal living
totally.
is also a very fun topic.
It's great, and the people who live here are all on various degrees of engagement with spirituality
Mm-hmm.
already. And like all of them had a lot of experience with LSD at that point. And
Right.
so I was in very good hands
Good.
going into it. I had done acid a handful of times when I was younger, but it was always in like these very chaotic situations, always for the purpose of escape.
Mm.
But being with this house on this camping trip was just a very different experience of drugs than I had ever done.